Hello, everybody. Here we are again. Another week has rolled by, and we're at edition 204. And I'm really pleased to say, for those of you watching on video, you'll see that we have a guest who's been on here many times before. Carolyn Eyre comes here every year in the autumn, and we have a chat about safeguarding, and not just around, well, in its broadest sense, safeguarding. So, hello, Carolyn.
Hello, good morning.
Yeah, you're at your home in England or Britain today, not in
I
France.
am.
Yes, yes.
No,
So
no,
welcome back. It was this time last year, I think. It was probably literally this weekend, wasn't it? When we,
it was it it was a week earlier
Yeah, it was
because it was
in end
half
of
term.
October.
That was Yeah, it was end of October because that's why I was in France, half term.
right.
So
And Stan, that's a date that you know very well.
It was because it was my daughter's wedding, so I knew it was 12 months. Recently had the first anniversary.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, Carolyn. It's great to have you. And I have to say, we do have a chat before we start recording, and often the chats are really illuminating. And some of them, which I'm pleased that we don't record because I think we'll end up in trouble if some of the stuff went live. But we've just had a fascinating discussion about a wealth of things, some of which we will be able to cover, some of it we won't, simply because we haven't got the time. But anyway, let's get to you, Stan. I assume you've had a reasonable week.
Yeah, yeah, reasonable week is true. It's in Salford. It's grim, but that's par for the course, I suppose.
Yeah, it's been one of the driest periods, isn't it? Driest autumns for
The
years.
driest day, or the driest 2 days, is it?
uh, anyway, what's caught your eye this week, Stan?
Um, it's something about Ofsted, which deserves the
See, see the buzzer doesn't work now. Well, it's all right for you, Stan. It's meant for me.
It's some research that's been done by Ashley Compton and Mark Bolan looking at what they define, I think it's somebody else's definition, of policy-based evidence. And they're looking particularly at Ofsted's reviews of maths and saying that as a policy-based evidence is that you make your policy up first and then you find the evidence to support it and you provide that as a research piece. And they're critical of the fact that the quality of the research that they've delved into might not be as robust as it should be. And there are other reports with far more robust research that show a different outcome to what Ofsted have come to. And I think probably the most disturbing bit is part of what they've come up with on problem solving runs against the national curriculum. And I'm surprised. I mean, I don't. You
You're
have to
not
be some kind
surprised,
of
then. You're not
geek.
surprised by
Well, you
that.
have to be some kind of geek to recognise that. But I'm surprised that's been allowed to happen. And basically, it's the quality of the research that's cited isn't particularly strong, but it's is supportive of the view that Ofsted appear to be taking as a pedagogical stance,
Mm.
that sort of direct instruction is the way. And some of the authors of the research that they've cited have said, no, you've taken that out of context. That's not what we were saying.
Mm.
So I think there's a question mark over should Ofsted be trying to influence teaching by doing research rather than providing evidence for other researchers to do the work on what works best, if you like. I just find it a bit odd. But the other thing I found, if I can just find it on my screen, in reading their report, just a second. Oh, come on.
But while you're doing that, I would also say that the they found evidence of references to research that took place in the 1930s, but also were referencing a study of which was in the States of an incredibly small sample of less than a dozen
It's four or
children.
five children.
This, and in a way, just for those of you who are watching who don't sort of know how inspection works, often these this evidence reviews were being read by staff who were due an inspection because they knew that they would then be asked by the inspectors whether or not they'd read the latest, say, maths subject review or the latest history subject review. So, I think the way that this has been sort of managed means that it's found its way into evidence gathering and evaluation within Ofsted, and if all of that is on, and it's all built on sand, isn't it?
Yeah.
These people working for Ofsted, the vast majority of them, this is not a research department in a university.
No, and also if Ofsted have struggled to get all the inspections done that they need doing, why is a significant chunk of time being spent doing something that's really, in my view anyway, not their role?
Yeah.
But the other thing I just found it now, and this is definitely taking something out of context. So I'm now guilty of exactly what I've said before.
Oh, go on then, Stan.
Part of the research by somebody called Lim says cautioned against adopting approaches from other cultures because cultural differences can mean they will not be as effective in other countries. It's talking about Shanghai and China and the maths taken from there. But it struck me that's a really, really important thing, even school to school. That cultures are different, so you can't just lift something from one school and say it'll work somewhere else. And I think if anybody does any real deep research, that would be worthwhile, doing a piece of research on how things have transferred from school to school and what's happened as a result.
And Becky Francis, who was in charge of the EEF but is now doing the curriculum assessment review, has made it clear within the EEF that one of the biggest problems is scaling up. You have a small sample, a small survey, which works in a place, but actually the difficulty then of getting that to run successfully elsewhere, you're not actually planting that project into the same place where the review took place. Everything is different. The people are different, the context is different, the classrooms are different, the community is different, the parents are different. All of this is a major challenge.
Yeah. And
for driving research.
the way it grows as a concept, as a way of doing things. I mean, I always quote Alvarado in New York, who did walkthrough. He was the guru for walkthrough, and he worked with a group of head teachers, principals in New York, and they videoed each other and they talked about walkthrough, and they worked through a process of walkthrough, which was very, very successful. He then moved and tried to do, I think it was in California, tried to do the same thing. But obviously he started from a point where he knew how it all worked. So didn't go through the early bits of how shall we do it, what will work best. And it was an absolute failure and he got sacked. And it was the same approach, but I think it's got to grow within the organization. You can't just drop it onto an organization and expect them to do it. And I think that's true of a lot of things. I think you've got to have the culture right in the school and want to do it, any organization rather than just schools. And there's got to be a desire to do it and an understanding of it as it grows.
And that gets us into culture, doesn't it,
Yeah.
Carolyn? That gets us
It does
into
link in with
culture.
culture. It does.
So what's caught your eye this week?
Well, it's sort of a bit boring in a way, but also I know that it caused me to smile. The big sort of piece of information pre-general election about the tax rate, the so-called tax rate on independent schools, making them pay VAT, and that idea of an independent school, a fee-paying private school, which was the language that was being used. One of my concerns, something I tweeted about quite a lot in that time, was there are so many independent special schools. Don't forget all the independent special schools who are not making huge profits and who make a massive difference to children's lives. And obviously the Labour government came in, and so we all knew that this was going to happen in the budget. At the last minute, it was realised that it was going to also apply to non-maintained special schools, which are not independent schools, but they're not local authority either. So the local authorities are going to be paying an extra 20% for each of those children with an EHCP who needs that really, really special education. And I know, you've talked many times on the on these chats about SEND and about the difficulties that people have getting an education that's right for the child. This is going to make it more difficult. But anyway, the reason I was smiling to myself last week and sort of rolling my eyes was the Foreign Office have written to a whole range of these top sort of independent schools asking whether they can have a discount on the fees, because the Foreign Office says they're not going to be able to afford to pay the VAT. So it's just like one bit of the government does one thing and then another bit of the government goes, oh, but please, can it not apply to us? The local authorities that are managing finances will just be going,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. I mean, I think it was interesting when you said that. I mean, one of the first schools I ever inspected was at Wheaton Barracks in Lancashire, Stan.
Yeah.
And it's I can't remember which regiment but actually there's an aircraft. It's not an airbase, but there's an aircraft at the front at the entrance to the barracks, and the in effect the sort of non-officer children, the vast majority of those attended the local school, which was within the barracks. But all the officers, their children were all at sort of various fee-paying schools, you know, and it really sort of I couldn't quite get my head around why that would be, and why and the impact it was going to have on those children. That in effect, the officers, the fact that the officers' children were not meeting or mixing with the non-officer children, it was a real sort of shock. But actually, the whole of this made, the VAT bit sort of plays into this, because for me, there is part of the work that I did in Ofsted was I was asked when I joined as an HMI, what have you not done? So I remember saying I've never inspected overseas, so I went and inspected the barracks in Bielefeld in Germany, but also said I've never been
Yeah, I know
to some of the
Bielefeld.
some of the poshest independent schools. And so I went to an incredibly posh independent school, not Eton or Harrow, because those were not part of the brief for Ofsted at the time. But this was incredible. It was incredible amounts of money being spent on, like 40 children with an indoor swimming pool for themselves of 25 meters, I think it was in Esher or somewhere. And it does get to me though. I can understand the reason why Labour want to do the VAT thing, because actually those schools, they're not charitable organisations. That the fees in that school, were incredibly high then. So it's a sort of like principled thing that when you start to work through the policy, the intricacies of the policy, you can see where all the gaps are going to start to appear. In principle, I agree with it, to be honest, but actually, I can understand that a blanket approach is probably going to lead to some vulnerable children, being harmed. So I mean, in a way, you choose to be a minister, don't you? You come up with these statements, and you've got to live with, delivery. So, do you think actually, Carolyn, it's going to be there will be is I don't know. Do you feel as though there's going to be any backtracking? I don't think this government's going to backtrack over it.
I, I don't. Well, I don't have any reason to think that there'd be a backtracking on it. I know that there had been lots of consultation with the special school sector before the budget. Um, that there had been some hope that maybe they would. It's about language, isn't it? The idea of a private school. You just describing a very, very nice, very affluent small school in a nice place. So many of the independent schools that I visit, they do have those amazing grounds and they do have all those facilities, but they also have 6 or 7 counsellors employed to work with the children who need that sort of emotional support. They have significant SEND departments with a SENCO, because there are so many children whose parents have found that they've had to pay for an education so their child's needs are met. Who have charitable places and take children from there's an amazing project, a national project, which takes children from inner cities who are particularly bright and places them in independent schools to give them a different future to the one that they might have had in their local community school. And I meet some of those young people and talk to them about their experiences. They go from the age of 15, so they're taken out of their local community school, and they get this opportunity for, they must go at 16, to do sixth form in an independent school with the richness of opportunity, sport and drama and music, and it's an amazing thing. And I asked a young man that I'd met who came from the middle of Liverpool. And I said to him, what do your friends think about it? And he said, oh, my friends all wish that they could come as well. So our idea of the private school is one thing. I'm sure there are schools like that who don't contribute in their communities, who don't want to make a difference to anybody except the people who pay most money. But then there are so many of these other schools which are doing amazing stuff, but the parents are paying for it. And then there's all the independent special schools.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then there's, and then there's the special schools which are they just happen to not be maintained schools, and it's lumping them all together. I think it feels socially unjust to me.
Yeah.
But I'm not the Chancellor of the Exchequer, so
my argument from my socialist point of view would be surely every school should be able to provide that.
Of course.
And not that it's wrong. I actually think I'm happy, fine with people paying for something that they think they're getting value for money. But my view of the way education should be is that should be easy to say, well, they're not getting better value for money because the schools locally in the middle of Liverpool, in the middle of Manchester, are offering just the same.
Yeah.
And
yes.
that's what I think, where the balance needs to be equalised a bit. But it's by bringing state education up, not by bringing private schools down. That would be my viewpoint.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering whether the government could, if there were ECHPs linked to this, whether or not they just would give a refund on the VAT for that child. Whether it's done in reverse. So, there is this blanket approach, but actually there then is a claiming system of refunding, for particular children, because obviously local authorities rely heavily, for these sorts of institutions to provide the sort of specialist support. Particularly, most local authorities aren't able to manage this sort of estate in the way that they used to. So there's a lot of a lot of sort of local authorities relying on this system, with this structure in order to provide an appropriate sort of level of provision for those children. So it is a sort of like a swings and roundabout thing, but just trying to find a way in which the principle can be held, but actually there is a repayment that softens it really.
I'm far from an expert on it. I'm just watching it from the outside and thinking about the impact it will have on so many of the schools that I work with. My instinct is that the government would have had the opportunity before the budget to look at those options and to say, well, actually, we'll just make clear that it applies to this kind of independent school, but not this kind of independent school. And they've made a choice to apply it to all, and everyone has to get on with it now, don't they? The local authorities will have to work out where they're going to find that money so that children still get the education they need. Or what we will see is more and more tribunal and ombudsman cases because local authorities are refusing to provide a child with an education which is the one that they needed, and then people will have to rethink. But for me, it's that idea of so many of the independent special schools are owned by charities or are non-profit making organisations, and it's the message out in society that bothers me, the idea that independent schools are all bad, when actually so many independent schools are there to fulfil a need that nobody else can meet, and that's it's independent against private. And the semantics of that, I think.
One of the things that has happened is, and you can get your buzzer ready now, Stan, is that Ofsted are currently developing a sort of safeguarding methodology in order to sort of implement, I think from next year, sort of regular visits. I don't know if have you heard or been involved in any of that work, Carolyn?
No, tell me.
Well, it's interesting. It all sits like most things within Ofsted. There's lots of work going on, or at least I think there is, and but they're not going to tell anybody about it, you know. And so there'll be a quick sort of consultation, and it'll be, as is often the case, you lump it or you leave it, sort of thing, you know. But yeah, so this sort of methodology is part of the reform. That there will be, more regular visits, to schools to check on safeguarding arrangements, and the thing for me was around a point that Stan made about culture, and you've raised a point about getting a safeguarding culture in a school, and I wondered whether or not, in terms of the work you're doing, whether or not safeguarding itself last year was a big thing, that you did a really massive, there was a lot of work going on, a lot of activity in the area, but it feels to me as if safeguarding has somewhat fallen off the table a little bit, and whether or not, there are some updates or things that are going on which we're not aware of, but you are.
The there's not so much, there doesn't seem to be so much going on with schools and safeguarding, statutory guidance. There was all those big, new documents. We had the new working together, and then the information sharing, and then keeping children safe had very few changes in it. There is quite a lot of change coming for the early years foundation stage. There's a charity, the Oliver Steeper Foundation, and Oliver Steeper was a little boy who died tragically in a nursery, in a childcare setting, when the setting didn't listen or didn't record the information that the parents had given about Oliver's weaning stage, and he choked. And his parents started this foundation, and they've been campaigning for changes to the EYFS. And also, they raised money to buy a device. It's called LifeVac. It's a device. They're trying to raise money to buy a LifeVac device for every nursery in the country. And this is it's a simple pump thing, but rather than pump air into somebody, it sucks.
Oh, right.
And it's about £70. So I'd come across this campaign. I'm chair of trustees of a setting which has two nurseries, and said to them, we're not going to wait for a charity to buy it for us. We'll just buy two. We'll buy one for each room. The staff were all trained in it. They're fixed to the wall. All of our staff know what to do in that situation. But the Oliver Steeper's parents have been lobbying and lobbying for better guidance. And the DFE published the new EYFS, in a reformed EYFS, in September, but then also in October published the Early Years Foundation stage safeguarding reforms, and it was the government response to a consultation. So they've told us what's going to happen next September. So early year settings, childminders are going to have a year of the new framework. And then next September, are getting a huge number of changes to their safeguarding arrangements. And it's all about culture. Early year settings and childminders will have to comply with safer recruitment techniques. They will be required to get references before they employ somebody. There's a little piece that they've added in to remind nurseries of their duty to provide references when their staff are applying for jobs elsewhere, because there's a big issue.
Am I the only one here thinking I'm shocked this doesn't happen already?
No, it's not a requirement for early years settings and childminders.
There's also the case that
there's
references are being reduced and reduced and reduced into virtual three-line.
This person exists. They worked here from January to March.
Yeah. And they're not under any disciplinary.
Yeah.
That's basically
yeah. You're absolutely right, Stan. And that was one of the things that had come up in the consultation. In particular, the very large companies that own chains of nurseries around the country, who, the names of these companies will be well known to anybody out there who's a parent or a grandparent. They have a policy of not providing references. And so this had come up in the consultation. So they're adding a bit about the duty to provide a qualitative reference and not just a to and from dates.
Right.
So there'll be work for the Safer Recruitment Consortium. We're busy writing a specific safer recruitment course for early years now, which will cover that. New guidance on training. So early years child protection policies will have to include training requirements, and it specifies the training that all staff working in early years must have. Very similar to keeping children safe in education, actually, you know, whistleblowing, how to raise concerns about your manager, indicators of abuse, specific child protection training on that's relevant to the age group. So many organizations will do generic child protection training, which might have a huge piece on child sexual exploitation, and child sexual exploitation isn't necessarily, or county lines isn't going to be relevant to the 0 to 4s.
Yes.
So the settings will have to ensure that the training is relevant to the age group that they work with. And then a section on safe eating. And the section on safe eating is as a result of Oliver Steeper's parents and the work that they've done. What a testament to their little boy. Every nursery will have to ensure that there is a trained paediatric first aider in the room with children when they are eating. People with paediatric first aid must keep that training updated. Well, that's a requirement anyway, but in Oliver Steeper's nursery, the one person who was trained had let her training fall out of date by 2 or 3 years. So a requirement. Where I'm chair, every one of our staff is paediatric first aid trained, and they all do their renewals. Why would we just have one in a room when we can make sure everybody's trained, you know?
Does that apply to
The
childminders as
importance,
well, Carolyn?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
but being in the
massive.
room with a child while they're eating, what an important
I
thing.
know.
And it seems so obvious, but apparently doesn't always happen. Making sure that staff understand a child's weaning stage, and don't just assume that because a child is a certain age, they'll be fine eating this. They seem like very obvious things, but there's never been that level of expectation on these settings before. So there'll be a lot of work, I think, for early year settings and childminders, a lot of training that they're going to need to help them to implement this from next September. And part of me thinks, why would we wait till next September? Where I'm chair, we've just implemented it all now. The bits that we weren't already doing.
I have to say the weaning bit is terrifying as a grandparent, where you know, oh, it's okay, just let him choke because that'll help him develop what? It's
Yeah.
really. I mean, I can understand it as a parent, it not being, being something that you are doing, but as a grandparent, when it's not your child, it's really scary. In fact, when our grandson was going through that stage, I used to leave the room. I couldn't cope with somebody appearing to choke and not want to do something about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's really.
times change as well. I mean, sorry, I was just going to say I've got 7 grandchildren now, and there are things that I got told off by one of my daughters for giving my grandson grapes. I didn't know that there was, really clear guidance now that you shouldn't give children grapes. You need to cut them in half.
Yeah.
So I did. I cut the grapes in half, and then she came past me and said, "You've cut them the wrong way. You're supposed to cut them lengthways, not crossways." And I was like, "Well, okay." I'm sure I gave my children grapes, but obviously there's a really good reason why parents are told that now. So,
Well,
yeah,
actually,
different times when it's your grandchildren. It's
yeah, well,
frightening.
that's fascinating because actually we have not really in all of these 204 editions spoken about safeguarding arrangements for the very youngest children, and I think we've sort of given that. It was really helpful today, Carolyn, to focus in on that. I mean,
Where would schools find that? I'm just thinking how we've got a number of nurseries and certainly a lot of reception classes. will they be able to find that information before it becomes out in next September?
Yeah,
There it is.
Right.
there it is. The early years foundation stage, safeguarding reforms, government consultation response. And actually, I like the way they've published the response, because they set out the section that they had suggested in the consultation, and then the responses, and then a qualitative sort of summary of the responses that had particular interest, and then they've set out what the wording will be in the statutory guidance next year.
Right.
Oh, right.
So
They're
that
giving
we
a
know
very clear,
exactly.
yeah, a long lead in time.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
ahead of the game, you know, you as you say, you can make those changes now, with a level of confidence that they will be introduced next year. So it's
yeah.
not wasted, a waste of time getting involved in that.
No,
The other thing,
and
just
it's all very sensible. Sorry, Frank.
and I was just going to say, just so that I'm clear, the name of that device that actually sucks rather than puffs in, like,
Life LifeVac, LIFEVAC, very cheap. In fact, I'm going to buy one now to keep in my house, because it's such a simple thing. I think I mean, lots and lots of people raise money for the Oliver Steeper Foundation to help them to buy these for settings that can't buy them for themselves. But you can just go on LifeVac's website and buy them, and having got them into nursery, I just thought, like Stan said, the responsibility when you're looking after your grandchildren, but also, an aging parent, or, I've been saying to a lot of my special schools, we should think about these in all settings,
yeah,
because anybody could
Yeah.
choke at any time. It's a simple first aid device. So I'm thinking about,
you really
I will get one
but it's
for our house.
£70, Carolyn. It's not. It's you do have to pick
£87
up.
on Amazon. I've just looked it up.
Oh, there.
Oh, well done, Stan.
And can be delivered tomorrow.
Oh, there's a cheaper one at 84. It's the same make, it's the same pack, but I
Right.
don't think it comes in a fancy
Can
box.
purchase these from other suppliers, as well. But
Apparently.
yeah, if I can just, what's caught my eye this week, I had a really interesting conversation with the co-CEO of the fair. Well, I won't give the name away, and it would be unfair to do that. But with a major charity that's involved in equality and equity. And this colleague had just spent some time in Australia, and Canada and America, and felt as though the focus that has happened in terms of trying to bridge the disadvantage gap, which is focused primarily starting at early years, then trying to retain that, to close the gap there and try and keep it closing as you move forward, which clearly this country has been awfully poor at. She found projects overseas where if the focus was much more on adult education, it's not for everybody, lots of people have got a reasonable level of education, but for the most vulnerable children, some of them, perhaps many, have parents who are not well educated themselves, and there needed to be a much greater focus on their needs, and it sort of tips upside down really, where the focus has been, which primarily has been around early years and trying to get it right early on, and clearly that's really important. She wasn't saying that wasn't important, but what she was highlighting was this lack of attention on adult education. And when you look at further education colleges, which have been underfunded since the coalition government, whose teachers did not get the 5% pay rise, they've not been included in that. They're now having to pay that, so they pay that where schools don't. All of these measures have made it increasingly difficult for the focus on adult education. So it was just making me wonder about, we perhaps have missed that. We haven't focused sufficiently on that. And it will be interesting to see. We had a guest on here who is the CEO of is it Workers' Education Association, WEA,
WAAO.
yeah, which has been going for years. Actually, it was the origins really. It grew out of, a real socialist movement, But actually, he said on the chat how difficult it was with regard to funding. Funding streams were so short term, so he never knew from one year to the next. They've got a body of staff out there doing amazing work. One of whom I know very well, doing amazing work with small groups of adults trying to improve their literacy and numeracy skills, but they can't offer those staff security of employment because the funding is always either on a year by year basis or or from a benefactor. So it's very tricky, but it did make me think that that's it's probably so bloody obvious. Why didn't we think of that? And it probably has been thought of, but other priorities have taken over. But I'd like to see further work going into the efforts that we're doing, offering for those who have poor literacy numeracy skills, who are parents, who are bringing up children in their houses, without the skills themselves to actually support their children's learning. And it sort of does shift it away from schools. It really does. So that's the area I'm looking at now to see what more I can learn from that.
I think you might find that quite a lot of schools are trying to fill those gaps. I've just finished doing an audit of a lovely, quite small multi-academy trust, which has a number of academies in Bradford, and one of the things that I talked to them about when I was visiting different academies was the amount of work they were putting in to literacy and numeracy for the parents, because they want the parents to be able to help the children with the homework, and so committing that money, spending that money. And one of the academies that I went to, they had an iPad in the reception area on a pedestal, on a sort of a perspex pedestal, and it's permanently running with the local vacancies page on it, so that parents who might not have a device at home can come in, can look at what jobs are available. A member of staff will help them if need be to do the application process. And you think, gosh, that's really thinking about the children in your school's wider
Yeah,
context.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a bit like the community cafe in the
Dave McPartland.
Dave McPartland's, where he's invited members of the police, the social services, to come and have a coffee at the same time that the parents are having cups of coffee. So that there's that, what they
Yeah.
call in industry water cooler moments, but coffee moments where people can get to know and ask questions, and, as you say, find jobs that are going, or find courses that are going and supported. But the problem is we haven't got the people, have we? Because the person who'll have to do that will probably be a teacher or a receptionist in the school. And we need people who are skilled in that job, based in the right places. It's something I've said many, many years ago. I talked about doctors' surgeries and the like being near supermarkets and not being out on their own. So it's a special journey. So if you can bring people together in a similar we're back to Sure Start now, aren't we? There's a knock-on effect for everybody, and it's so easy to do, but there's no money to do it.
No, interesting that you
No.
talk about Bradford, Carolyn, that I was at Dixon's secondary school in Bradford about 6 months ago, where something similar to this was taking place, or trying to implement it. All of this grew out of the opportunity area, where they actually were trying to get health services located in the secondary school. And again, secondary schools, if you're going to have space, it might be in a secondary school. So that and there's just this concern about, would that be, because the competition element of it, well, does that service then mean that school would appear more favourable to a local community than perhaps another school that doesn't have the service offered? So there was all of that working its way through, but they built up enough, I think, respect for each other that they didn't really care. They just wanted the community to benefit from a health service that was easy to get to, and that would include dental, oral hygiene services as well being located at some of those schools as well. So, it's an interesting development, but it is really this is not happening all over the place, is it? This is not something that's happening around here. I know that for sure.
Right.
No. Okay, well, Carolyn, thank you for coming back. That's 40 minutes of your life has just evaporated, but we've gained a lot from it, and
Yeah,
we'd love
it's
to have
done.
you back again next year, all being well. We'll be somewhere up to edition 250 by then, so who knows, it might be that weekend. But anyway, thank you for joining us, and thanks everybody for your time this morning, and we'll hopefully all being well see you all next week. So cheerio. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.